Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I just wanna quilt. Today we talk to Shelancia Daniel of the Creativity Shell. She is incredible. So she tells her story about her quilting life and her new endeavor, which is pretty remarkable.
Sure. My name is Shelancia Daniel, and I'm calling in from Houston, Texas.
Awesome. And you're with the Creativity Shell, right?
That's Creativity Shell, yes.
Awesome.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
Awesome. Well, we're going to start with, tell me your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life.
Is that memory of myself, or is that memory of somebody else?
Whatever it is. Whatever it is. Both, probably. Let's start with, do you have a memory of someone other than you sewing before you started sewing?
Yeah, my grandmother. She used to sew all the time. I was born in Jamaica, and for as long as I remember growing up, she used to sew and mend all of our clothing. So we wore a lot of dresses and shirts, and she would be the one that made all of them.
That's really cool. And when did you start sewing?
I started sewing when I was 4 years old, and I remember it just very fondly because it was supposed to be my first day of school, but I couldn't go because my birthday is in January, and it didn't meet the cutoff of December 31st. So when I went to school that September when I was 4, thinking I could start kindergarten, they told me I had to go back home, and I was devastated. And
That's
I cried.
horrible.
And my grandmother gave me my first sewing kit that day, and that's when I started sewing.
Wow. That's really cool. I love that. And so tell me a little bit more about your sewing journey.
Well, like I said, it started when I was 4, and funny to kind of continue on with that story. The next year when I actually could go to school, I brought my sewing kit, and I ended up getting expelled from kindergarten because you're not allowed to bring needles and real scissors into kindergarten, and I wouldn't part with my sewing kit. So that's how that happened. And I've been sewing on and off. When I was about 8 years old, I joined a quilting club. I grew up in Canada at this point, and I joined a quilting club, and I was obviously the youngest person in that quilting club. Everybody was at least over 50, but that's how I learned how to do just different quilting techniques.
And how were they with you when you were in? So when you joined the quilting club, were they nice to you? Were they encouraging? Sort of, what was that experience like to be a kid with all these grown-ups?
Well, it was funny because there was a store called Fabricland, and it was a fabric store in Canada, and I saw a poster there. It said a quilting club, so I called and asked if I could join, and I thought that they were really surprised, but they were so kind. I mean, all the ladies there, they just embraced me, and they were just really happy that I wanted to learn how to quilt.
That's really cool. That's very cool.
So, and that was a lot of fun. And I also, another fond memory, there's a woman, I had a paper route around this time as well. And back then we delivered papers, I'm completely aging myself now because it was a while ago, but you had to go and collect the actual money from your client. Well, I went to her house one day to collect the money, and I looked inside her house and she made dolls. So I was just like, oh my God, who made these? And she said, I did. So I offered to clean her house in exchange for her teaching me how to make dolls.
You are entrepreneurial you were so entrepreneurial from a little teeny thing. That's crazy.
Well, what I learned in my later years that when you're creative, you just like to do things and you kind of dive in and ask questions later. So when I did all these things like join a quilting club or, ask some random woman to take me under her wing to sew, it was more of the fact that there was somebody who was just so creative, who I respected and wanted to learn from, and just reached out to them and they embraced me, which I've always been really lucky like that people generally, they embrace me and that makes me feel special.
That's really cool. Well, I mean, you've got I think that's awesome. All right. So Then you went to do a bunch of school. You did a lot of school. I do a lot of school too. So I'm totally pro school, but you did a lot of school. So tell us what you did. What was all the schooling you did?
Yeah. So when I graduated high school about 2 years early because I just wanted to get out of there.
You're ridiculous, right? You are so ridiculous, right? Because
I found out that if you did night school and summer school, you can actually graduate early. And I was like, what? This is great. So
great.
By the time I was 17, I lived in this small town called Oakville, and I moved to the big city in Toronto. I grew up in Canada. And started going to the Academy of Design and started taking costume design. And for 2 years, that was when I think I just really found a part of myself that was missing.
That's
where
really cool.
You live by the motto of the theater, the show must go on. But you also learn a different element of who you are. And everything that I do now kind of comes from those years. And it taught me so much about work ethic and finishing what you started and just thinking outside the box and doing stuff that's creative and different.
That's so cool.
I did that, graduated when I was 19. I worked on theater and film sets for a few years, and then I started my own business being a custom bra designer.
Really?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I started out, of course, wanting to be a fashionable bra designer, but because of my background in theater, a lot of medical experts really gravitated towards my ability to custom make bras for different medical conditions.
How weird!
So
That's so crazy.
Yeah, it was fun though. It was I would women who had cancer and were undergoing mastectomies, I would make molds of their breasts prior to surgery, so I could use that mold to make them a custom mold after, and then make them their own custom bras. And also loved going to the hardware store, Lowe's and Home Depot. So worked a lot with women who had like pectus excavatum, which is where their sternum is inset into going into their rib cage, and was able to make some custom bras for medical conditions.
That's huge. So, all right, you're it
was really cool.
You're amazing. Okay, but you're not even done. So graduate early, you go do costume design, you're doing incredible things for women with bras, and then what do you do?
And then I started having children, and I moved. My husband got a job assignment. He works for an oil company, so we moved to Africa for 4 years. So when I was there, my kids were just babies, and I went back to school and got a bachelor's degree in finance, because why finance? You come from a costume background. Right. And I was able to explain it that if, costuming, you always have to know what's going on in the world, right. And finance is the same. So it kind of works hand in hand with each other, that, it's a really good degree. But really started working a lot with children when I was there, and I would organize different activities and find fun ways for them to do things, because we had different cultures that we're working with. One, you had kids who were really wealthy, you had kids who were expats, and you also had kids who were extremely poor. So how do you have these three different types of children, and how do you get them to learn in an environment together and still take into account all their differences and all the things and struggles that they have to go through? Whereas, for example, kids in Africa who are very wealthy, and even expats, you have to worry about them getting kidnapped. So you couldn't bring them into different rural areas and things, because it always has to do the back of your mind that you have to keep them safe. Whereas kids who didn't have anything didn't have access to education. So when you want to do things like a story time, for example, you have to understand that many of them don't know how to read. So I always tried to find different ways to get them to learn and have fun, and still be educated and remember what we're talking about. So I became the scavenger hunt queen. We did scavenger hunt.
Really?
And we had different themes for it, so that like, for example, one time it was the pirates theme, and it was a great way to teach kids about different oceans and different countries, and use something as fun like pirates to be the background, because they can relate to that. And of course, being a costumer, they have to dress up.
Oh my gosh, you're so amazing.
Make stuff.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And then what age? What age were these kids that you were working with?
My kids at the time my youngest was a baby, so they were 4, 5, 6, 7.
It's a great
but
age.
some of the high school kids would come into it as well because it was fun. Yeah. They got to play a game and not realize that they were learning. And then months later, I'd say, hey, you know what? Remember that, Red Cross worker? Like, what country were they from? It's like, oh, they're from Norway. And it's like they were retaining the information.
That's really cool.
But it was from something silly like, oh, just a game.
That's really cool.
So coming back to the U.S., that was really important for me, where looking at the culture of the kids that we have, I think so much of what we focus on, we look at socioeconomics, we look at race, and we're always using that as a measurement to say, why are our kids not learning? Yeah. And we take out the generational aspect. We take away the fact that just like you and I are having a podcast or we're video chatting, this is a different generation. This is not something that they could do 20 years ago. So the way that we have to educate them is the way that we have to do it based on their generation, not on what we're thinking. And that's really pretty much what the Creativity Shell does. Yeah. And that's pretty much the onset of how the Creativity Shell started.
So before you got there, you had one more degree because you are very schooly like me. So tell me.
Yes, I do. When I did come back to the U.S. now, so I just started the Creativity Shell at this point, and I kept on hitting a lot of roadblocks because I was just like, I am missing something.
So let's hold on for then. So you started the Creativity Shell before you went to get the master's degree?
I did. I started it kind of at the same time.
Interesting. Okay, so tell us a little bit about how those work together, and tell us, in case people don't know what it is, tell us what the Creativity Shell is so that they can kind of follow along with your path of where you've been.
Sure. I will kind of backtrack actually and just talk about the degree first, because it will kind of help to explain the Creativity Shell. Yeah. So I have a master's degree in educational psychology, and it has a focus on creativity and cognition. So what I was researching when I was doing that master's degree was basically taking a trade like sewing and blending it with psychology to see if I could use that to get kids to achieve an outcome that I wanted them to achieve. So what the Creativity Shell is.
So I just have to pause for just a second, because what I see with your education, so, I see this, I'm starting to see this trend more and more, but what I think is so amazing about your education, and my kid is now in high school, and so we're having lots of conversations about like what college should be and all these sorts of things, and what you sort of are is a model of someone who, like, you see these different, you can sort of see the pieces as you're talking, right? The costume design, the part, finance, which you definitely need to have a successful company and to sort of be thinking about things. You have to understand the finance side. And then adding the educational psychology, it is not the kind of traditional like, oh, I went for my history degree and then I went to law school kind of thing. That kind of path. It is very like strategic in the sense of like, well, what do I need to know now to keep doing what I want to do? And I think that that's so important for thinking about education of like, these different pieces, that it isn't just going to school for school's sake. Like that it's because you say, okay, I need that part now. And that's what my kid and I have been talking about with her education of sort of, well, what part are you going to need next? So I'm just it's really impressive. I just have to say
well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. A funny story, I'll backtrack because I did my finance degree online when I was living in Lagos, Nigeria. Mm-hmm. But because I was going to an American school, I had to write my exams at the U.S. Embassy. And that was a really cool experience because here I am. This was around the time of the Libya bombing and stuff. I remember writing an accounting exam with, armed guards with machine guns at my back. And I wish I'd taken a picture because I'm just like, okay, I am concentrating right now.
Right. That's craziness. Oh, my goodness. That is perseverance.
But it is those experiences that I do tell children when it does come to education that if something does seem impossible, find out what the possibility is. And like you're saying, find out what it is that you need from that experience. Obviously you graduate with the degree, but what did you learn from it? What life experience did you learn from it? Totally. And that's so much of what the Creativity Shell just really embraces is life skills. Yeah. Where following that hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and being able to reach self-sustainability at the top, so much of it relies on, that baseline of being able to, find shelter, make your own food, get clothing, And those are things that, like you said, it really encompasses all my degrees together.
Yeah.
That at that point, I was able to say, hey, I couldn't reach self-sustainability until I got to this point of my
really
life because all the pieces weren't together.
Right, that the pieces are coming together. So tell us more about what Creativity Shell does.
Sure. So, like I said, when I started it, I went back to school because there was a missing puzzle piece that I couldn't figure out. I started teaching sewing classes to a group of grades 4 to 6s, and they lacked the fundamental skills that they needed to learn how to sew. They wanted to do it, but they physically couldn't do it. They couldn't hold scissors. They couldn't tie knots.
Why
they
do you
couldn't
think that
thread
was?
needle. That was the question I needed really to answer. Like, why can't they do this? This is something that they should be able to do. Well, psychologically, they weren't raised to do it. They were raised with iPads and computers.
Really
they weren't raised with those fundamental or the practical skills of, cutting paper. Many of them have never seen a sewing machine before. They've never had to sew anything before. Some of their parents don't sew. Mm-hmm. So, furthermore, that practical part, I'm like, okay, they just haven't done it. But the fundamental skills, they couldn't solve basic problems. It's like, okay, you had a knot that needed to be tied and you couldn't do it. It's like, okay, forget it. They couldn't persevere. The minute they made a mistake, they were crying. And these are grades 4 to 6 kids.
That's craziness. That's really interesting.
Their decision-making skills, absolutely poor. But the worst of all was that they're all addicted to instant gratification. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't a quick, fast, easy, here, now project, they're done. They're out. So what I needed to figure out was the psychology behind this. How do I use this trade to basically help to wean them off of these things that we're seeing that no one's really talking about? Are we talking about kids being addicted to instant gratification? We talk so much about the opioid addiction, but I think instant gratification is so much worse because it leads to so many other bigger problems than the addictions that are the bigger ones, like the opioids and things like that. I mean, think of it like this. We take our kids painting to a painting place. They paint a beautiful picture. Everyone paints the same picture, right? They come out of it saying, hey, I'm going to be a painter, right? They say, let's just forget about college because I'm this great artist. I painted this great picture. Yeah. And then they end up going, getting older, and they realize, hey, you know what? I can't paint. Or I really couldn't play soccer. That medal that I got or all those trophies, I just got them because I was there. Now you have a child who has 500 Facebook friends. They're realizing that those aren't their real friends. They really can't do all these things that they thought that they could do. And now they're expected to go out into the real world and survive on their own, and they can't cope with it, right? And that is exactly what the Creativity Shell is trying to do. We're trying to build stronger kids by using this trades and using the skills that we can teach them to make them stronger, to wean them off instant gratification, to build up coping skills, to build up problem-solving skills, perseverance skills, so that when they become of age, they will not be afraid to leave the nest.
And that they're not afraid of failing, and they're not afraid of, like, you have to try and you have to rip it out and try it again. Like all these things that, like, you know for sewing. And that there's, and that to enjoy the journey as much as the end result,
Yeah. And because we're so good at the psychology aspect, we're able to create artificial situations for them that we can control that forces them to thrive in it. So, for example, all of our projects are graded. So we deliver it to them in a very systematic process. When they first come in, we give them instant gratification, and we gradually wean them off of it. But then we create elements. Like, for example, last weekend, we had our Munchkin Market, which is an open market where the kids get to make things and they sell it and they get to keep the money from it.
That's very cool.
That artificial situation that we just created, this market, it forced them to work hard to be in it because they made a lot of money.
That's really cool.
I mean,
I love it.
They made a lot of money. But I can also say for the last 12 weeks, I had over 80 kids who were just working, and they did fail, and they did overcome it. They did cope with the failure. They had to rip out seams. They had to, redo projects. but that's their way of learning that it's okay.
I love it. So I'm looking at, you have a lot of classes. This is really amazing. So tell me a little bit about the structure. So all kinds of classes: fashion, industrial design, art, textile art, intermediate sewing, tons and tons of stuff going on. And for homeschoolers, all the way through, it looks like through high school. It's just a lot. And love the idea of family workshops. That's really cool too. I love that.
Those have been a lot of fun.
That's really cool. I totally want to come to your family pajama workshop.
We're having one on Friday, actually. They're a lot of fun.
That's really cool. And do the family, they all make pajamas?
Yeah, they make pajamas. They can make matching pajamas, or they can make it like cross-matching where you have two of the same fabrics and two of the other fabrics and stuff. But that's also been really cool for the parents, because a lot of our parents don't sew themselves.
Yeah.
So they're coming into the studio completely intimidated because some of their kids can sew even better than they can. But it's a great way to come together. And unlike some places where you go and it's just such an easy, instant gratification, you actually really have to work hard. So the only drawback that we do get is that sometimes people just get a little bit intimidated. But we make it easy. We give you guidelines if you need them. The patterns are simple. We choose really good fabrics that aren't difficult to sew, and we provide a lot of help as well. So everyone pretty much completes the project.
And so tell me,
and it's a good way for us to fundraise too.
So do you have a space? Tell me a little bit more about the structure of Creativity Shell.
We have our studio, which we use to teach classes. People who come to our studio, they pay to teach classes. They pay to come in to get a class. But a lot of our work is also outside of the studio. We work in shelters. We work with kids who are homeless, kids who have been trafficked. And we basically go into those environments and build the same magic. We teach our classes there with the same objectives of trying to help our students build confidence and self-esteem and perseverance, learn how to cope, but also to provide therapy for some of them who have just been through some horrible situations.
Yeah.
And we hope that they can come out of it by being able to make something that they can call their own.
That's really amazing. All right, so how much does it cost to use? What's the typical average cost of your classes at your studio?
At our studio, it's a semester. We go by semesters, and most of the semesters are 14 or 15 weeks. And they're $225 for the whole semester. Works out to about $13, $14 a class.
That's really good.
And everything's included, so you don't have to bring any fabrics. You don't have to bring any supplies.
That was
you don't have
my
to bring
next
sewing
question.
machines.
Right, that's great. So that everything's there for them, and that's included in the cost of the class.
Yes, and because we're a nonprofit, that's how we are able to keep our costs low, because we do get a lot of fabric donations. A lot of people will donate supplies to us.
Yeah.
And people always say, what do you guys need? And I'm like, we're the Creativity Shell. One time we got a donation of old mattress springs.
Yeah.
And we use them to make lights. We made little lanterns out of them.
That's really cool.
So the things that we get, and it forces us to constantly be thinking outside the box and to make things that aren't the traditional pattern that you would see in a fabric store.
Yeah, very interesting. And then how does your sort of structure, since you're a finance person, how did you go about thinking about Creativity Shell to keep it afloat, or to, what is your sort of strategy on that side of it? Did you have a plan going in terms of the finance side of the nonprofit?
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people do look at, because that is funny enough. Of all my degrees, people look at the financing structure and say, wow, this obviously comes from a finance background. But I kind of mirrored our nonprofit similar to a Chapter B corporation, where to stay afloat, we can't just rely on volunteers. We can't just rely on donations. We have to be able to generate an income of our own. And we do that through teaching classes and really having the community embrace us. So kids love our classes. We just actually won a grant that I wrote. It was awesome, for 10 pages. But we just got a mobile sewing unit.
Oh, right. You have to tell me about that. Okay, that's crazy. Yeah. I love that idea. So tell me about the mobile sewing studio. First of all, What? Like, how is that? Like, what does it look like?
You know,
Is it like I want to be on? I want to see it and like experience it. So tell me more about it.
it's cool. Well, we named him Jerry after the foundation that we got the grant from. But that was an idea that I had from a long time ago. That when the grant came about, it was just like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. This is going to be the craziest thing someone's ever going to probably get. And they literally wrote us back and said, "Are you serious?"
That is so great.
But yeah, and that's kind of what we do. We do birthday parties, we do events, and all those events, if someone has a birthday party in our studio or now our mobile studio, we can tell the little girl or the little boy that part of their birthday party is going to help support somebody in need right now.
That's
and
really cool.
Those are the funds that we will take, and we will go into some of the shelters. Human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, is a big, big thing for us. And we work directly. We have direct contact with the survivors, and these are things that we can do from funds that we generate through having events, and parties and classes. We started doing corporate events now. We go into different offices and bring our sewing machines and have lawyers and doctors sewing with us.
That's really cool.
So that's how we are raising funds.
You're amazing. I'm just amazing. So,
Thank you.
Really, I mean, I just think it's incredible. It's such a great blend because there's people that are like really trying to figure out how to encourage the next generation to sew, and they're looking for sort of models and things to do. And you're a perfect model of that, of like the blending of all these different things. It's remarkable. Now, it looks from your website that you have another space in New York. Is that true? Is there a you have chapters?
In Rochester.
Tell us about the different chapters.
This is our next. It's our next really undertaking. We're stronger together.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we have been successful at is really adhering to the needs of this generation. And a lot of times people will say, "Hey, I'm trying to do exactly what you're doing, but it's not working."
Yeah.
And I tell them it's because you're doing it your way. You're doing it the way that we were taught when we were younger. And times have changed. We can't do that anymore. So, and then we're constantly evolving. We hardly do the same thing twice. At Quilt Festival, someone came to us and said, "Well, this isn't the same booth that you guys had last year." And I'm like, and we're going to have a completely different booth next year.
Yeah, totally.
We're the creativity shell. We have to evolve. We have to change. So the Rochester chapter we opened because part of it was more research on my part, where the things I'm seeing in Houston, we teach classes to high socioeconomic areas. We teach classes to low socioeconomic areas. And I'm like, what is the measurement? What is the constant or the common denominator here? So going to Rochester, different state, different climate, different everything, we're seeing the same things. And it's really scary because I can say, like, across the country, we have a generation of kids growing up without practical skills.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been able to really pull from Rochester and Houston, and kind of mirroring each other to build that mold.
That's really interesting. So interesting. You're just amazing. It really, I'm now like immersed in your whole world here. It's just so interesting and cool. So if people are listening and they want to either help, or they want a chapter 2, or they're just, what do you suggest that they do? Obviously reach out to you, but how can someone that just goes, "Yes, I totally get this, I want to be part of this," from our quilting community, what do they do?
It's a lot of work. I will definitely put that out there, that it's not something that you can just say, "I want to do," and you have to dive into it and be really ready, because
do you have volunteers? You take donations, you have volunteers, sort of those things, all kinds of ways that they can sort of participate.
Yes, we're constantly looking for teachers. Like right now in Houston, we're actually looking for a sewing teacher with a Class B license that can drive our bus and teach at the same time.
That's really great.
You will get to drive Jerry and teach classes around the city in different locations. And it will be a lot of fun for somebody who's really down like that.
Right. That's so funny.
But our website, we have a campaign actually that we're really reaching out for donations now. I think earlier I talked about our Munchkin Market where the kids got to sell the things that they've made. Well, we are building a social enterprise to mirror that as we're working with the homeless. We're working with homeless youth, 16 to 25, and we're teaching them how to make things. And we're going to open up public markets in different parks in the city. They're called Made Markets, making a difference every day. And the homeless, you'll be able to shop from them directly. You'll be able to buy things that they learn how to make, and they get to keep the money from it. So we're asking for donations on our website, which is creativityshow.org, so that we can help to go into different shelters and continue teaching the classes and get the different materials and supplies that we need to give them to make some of the things that they can make and sell. And it's important. They get to keep the money. The money that they make does not come back to our organization because, again, going back to finance, I want them to learn financial literacy. I want them to open their own bank accounts. I want them to understand the value of their work and possibly how to start their own businesses by being able to create.
I love it. I totally love it. It's so cool. You're so cool. I'm kind of like overwhelmed by your amazingness. And not having great answers,
I'm
not
sure
great
you said
questions.
that to everybody.
It's so cool. I mean, like you've got it all right, and it's just amazing. Now, this didn't happen overnight. So tell us how long you've been doing this, because I think sometimes people just think, oh, well, she just did it all. This is all just like she just figured it all out. How long did it take you to get to where you are at this point?
I would say realistically, it's taken me about 38 years. That's how old I am to get to this point. But
I feel the same way.
But I started this 3 years ago, and hold on just 1 second.
Sure.
Sorry, my computer's dying. I started this 3 years ago, and as
that's
a
still
nonprofit,
a really short
we've grown
period of
really
time.
fast in 3 years.
That's really fast because that's a lot of programming for 3 years.
It is. And that's, a lot of people do look at it and say, you've grown a lot in 3 years. But like I said, it's been not without tears and not without just really putting in some endless hours to make it grow because we had to. The need was there. That we were at a position, when we started, it was, okay, we're going to teach sewing classes. And the response we got was, kids don't want to sew anymore. That's not what they do. But we made it so much fun for them. We have this amazing fashion show. It's called Creativity Rocks. And it's like we create these artificial situations like the Munchkin Markets and the fashion shows that the kids want to be a part of. So the kids have been coming to us willingly. And they're coming to us willingly. So we had to move really quickly so that we could keep them. And by doing that, that's how we've been able to constantly change, constantly evolve, keep afloat, and just keep them going.
Now, how many kids do you think have gone through your program so far?
Singular or like right now we work with about 300 children a week.
Wow.
But that's also like during a 12-week program.
Yeah. And I guess my question is kind of the metrics of the program, like how, because that's what people always want to know with nonprofits, right? Or sort of what's your numbers are looking like?
Our numbers, I usually go by how many kids that we work with a week and how many kids we work with a year. So last year we worked with about 22, almost 2,300.
Wow.
In our fashion show, we had 140 children in the show.
Wow.
But that's also a really, really big step where it's like, that's a lot of kids for one fashion show.
That's a lot of kids.
Deal with. What I say though with our numbers too is that I would say they're almost declining, but declining in a good way because we've had kids who stayed with us. So considering there's no grade, there's no credit, there's nothing that they're getting from this except for their own intrinsic reward of being in our program.
Yeah.
We've had kids with us for the last 3 years that have just been growing with us. That's amazing. Really important to us.
That's amazing. That's really, really remarkable. How many do you see other programs like this out there targeted to kids? Like are there other spaces that are doing similar things, or do you feel like you're sort of pioneering this kind of intersection of children and social justice, social need kind of thing? Sort of tell me more about what you think about sort of where your place is within this sort of ecosystem.
Yeah, I definitely do not think that we're the only ones, but I think that we're the only ones doing it in such a crazy way.
Yeah.
I think what it is, it's like if you try to keep up with us, I think
Yeah.
people get exhausted because it's like, okay, what are you guys doing now? It's constantly changing. We just finished our Munchkin Market, and even though we're getting ready for our annual fashion show, the theme last year was different from the theme this year. Last year was Atlantis, the Lost City, so we took the kids through waterways. This year, it's the Orient Express. Completely different theme, a completely different adventure. So even
really
kids
great.
that were in the last 3 shows are doing it again this year. They're going to have a completely different experience than they did from 2 or 3 years ago.
That's amazing.
So that's also, a lot of that is also me, where that's how I think. I don't like to do the same thing. I could never have a 9-to-5 job where I did the same thing every day. I'd go crazy. So I get to bring a lot of my madness into this and really relate to a lot of kids who think the same way, that like that creativity and like constantly thinking outside the box.
That's really interesting. Now, for those of the people out there who think, oh, I totally want to do something, how do you get started with something like this? Did you feel like you had to have like your own finance or get grants, or like how do you start? Because that's where people always kind of freak out about like, well, I can't possibly do something because I can't afford it, or I don't know how to begin it. Did you feel that way when you first started?
Luckily when I first started, my husband, he has a really good job, so I was able to work without having to pay myself. And that was a really big step because I was actually able to really reinvest into the organization for 2 years and basically do it, for free on my part. And it's difficult to get somebody full-time that can do something for free for 2 years.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I feel like that with the project that we're doing now, because it's a great project, but my income doesn't depend on it. And so that's huge. If you can, whatever way you're doing it, whether you have a full-time job and you're doing this part-time, or if you have a spouse that's supportive, or you have a weird job like mine that says you can do weird projects as part of your job. I think that is the hard part, is sort of figuring like
I hear it, and it's huge. When you actually come out and say it, a lot of people don't say that's what it was, but looking at the numbers, I can say absolutely the fact that I was able to dedicate 2 years full time working with this, plus going back to school. It's a lot to put together into one basket. But at the same time, too, I think a lot of people start nonprofits thinking that they're going to get grants right away, and you don't. No one gives you, unless it's someone that you're not going to get a grant until you can prove that you can do exactly what it is that you said that you're doing. So where we've been successful is, and again, we dove in. We wanted to teach sewing classes. We started teaching classes. We started getting kids. We started getting our metrics down where the community could see, you know what? They're actually doing what they say that they're doing. And we had results. We had kids. If you come to our studio at 4 o'clock when the classes start after school, there are kids lined up knocking at the door to come in. And if you bring a grantor to your studio and they see that, and it's like, whoa, this is real.
It's amazing.
This is real.
Now, what do your studios look like? How many sewing machines do you have? How many classrooms do you have? So what does it look like in your space?
Oh my gosh, it's a hot mess. Our studio is a mess right now. So I'm happy that we're not there. You're not seeing it because there's fabric held high to the ceiling.
That just means there's a lot of creativity going on,
That's there, and it's like creativity happens.
Right.
But when I started the creativity show, I had 2 sewing machines. And now between Houston and Rochester, we have over 150.
Whoa.
And those are all machines that we've had either purchased brand new or they've been donated. Bernina has been one of our major sponsors.
That's so
and they've donated over 72 machines to us.
Wow.
Brother has donated machines to us. But when we first started, we had to buy every single machine we had because companies would not just give them to us because they didn't know who we were.
Right.
When we get machines donated to us from individuals, we give them to kids in our classes. If we have students in our classes who are thriving, who are working hard, who may not have a machine at home. Sometimes if we have new machines that have been built, or even used machines that have been refurbished, we give them to them and they can take it home and continue their work. We had a really special student one time. She was self-harming herself, and really badly. And I had to really sit her down and say, okay, you're always not afraid of cutting yourself. You're not afraid of blood. And if you learn how to sew with me, you can be a surgeon. And she was like, what? I was like, yes, this is a job. And that actually really inspired her. She really started sewing. But I gave her a sewing machine at the end of the semester, and her mom called me. And I remember that moment because her mom was like, do you know where my daughter is right now? And I almost started to cry because I thought that she had done something that had gotten her injured. And she was like, she is in her room sewing with the machine you gave her, making bags to sell to her friends.
It's amazing,
and I was just like, oh my God, this is it. This is what we're supposed to be doing.
You took an interest and you changed someone's life in a huge way. And that's huge. Yeah. That's amazing. I just totally am madly in love with your project. Totally. Yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's definitely a labor of love. And like you said, if anybody does, think that they do want to start a chapter, email me. My email is s@creativityshell.org. And definitely let's talk about it. Let's see what the possibilities are. And we would love to have this grow all over the country. I think my dream would be for our fashion shows if we can get kids that coming in from different parts, Alaska, Seattle, and being able to come down and showcase the things that they've made. Some of these kids aren't the sports kids. They're not going to travel with their sports teams and stuff. But if they can travel for creativity, I think it would just be so amazing.
I totally agree. It's so interesting because we keep having these conversations. This project is we're a year in, and we've just had all these different conversations. And one of the questions we had was sort of how do you encourage youth, and it was like having spaces for them that are incredibly exciting and creative, and give them opportunities, and treat them like kids, but also give them opportunities the way grown-ups have opportunities. And it seems like that's really what you're doing. And you're giving them ways of seeing themselves that they may not see without the program.
Absolutely.
It's really
cool.
Well,
if you ever want to see something fun, Saturday, March 30th is our next fashion show in Houston. It's called Creativity Rocks, the Orient Express.
Yeah.
The kids just go crazy. They love it, and they strut their stuff down that runway and things that they've made. And I cannot tell you that any kids will be more prouder than they are in that moment. It's just spectacular.
I love it. I totally love it. Well, this is very cool. Now, the question I have to ask you before we end is, do you have any, so did you, first, what's the name? Why did you call it Creativity Shell?
So funny, when I was living in Africa, I lived in Lagos. My son, Elijah, was always really sick. He had really bad asthma, really bad allergies, and the air was just so dusty that he would just be constantly sick and out of school. So I used to take him to this little beach where nobody was, and it was nice because it was quiet. It was, salty sea air, the humidity, and he thrived in that. But because he was missing school, I would make him chase crabs, and that's how he learned how to count. They would just run and go down little holes, and I'm like, okay, there's 3 crabs, and then one of them hid. How many do you have left? He's like, 2. And that's how he learned math. And he's actually a fantastic mathematician right now. He's now 11. So one day at school, we're going to international school. So just think of this, there's expats and diplomats and politicians, and these are the types of kids who are in these international schools, very wealthy kids. So his class had an assembly, and they asked the kids what made them happy. All the kids were like, I like my big house, my cars, my vacations. And then there's Elijah standing up, and he says, I'm Elijah, and I like to chase crabs. And that was my moment of like, oh my gosh, that Cat's Cradle song. I don't know if you remember that, but I was like, he was just like me. He likes to be outside, He likes to learn using unconventional ways. So most people think that the shell from the creativity shell is because my name is Shelancia, but our logo is actually a shell from a crab, and that's where it comes from.
That's
it just
really
reminds me
great.
of him liking to chase crabs.
Oh, I like that so much. Now, what about intellectual property or the lessons you're teaching? Sort of any kind of intellectual property issues that come up, or do you think that you're going to sort of make a book or sort of use lessons that you're doing? Sort of, what's your thoughts about sort of the intellectual property you're creating or the use of others or other things like that?
I think a lot of our intellectual property comes down to our patterns that I used to be a pattern drafter, so I re-engineered a lot of our patterns. So we've been able to deliver them in a way that has made us unique, where we've been able to simplify sewing for this generation. When we're ready to unsimplify it, we can, but we can get kids into our programs making things that are spectacular by really cutting out some of the rules that most people traditionally follow.
Oh, I like that. So tell me, give me an example.
It's kind of hard, to explain it. And it's so funny because I was just trying to explain. We just have a new program director, and I was trying to explain it the same way because she's trying to get into my head, and it's like, wow, that's a really hard place to get into. Because for me, it's just like, I just draft it, and it's like she understands it, but it was just like I would never have done it this way.
Yeah.
So it's hard to explain. You kind of have
Right.
to see it. But when the kids get it, what it can do is basically you can take a project that has been traditionally known to take 2 hours, and I can break it down in 20 minutes.
That's amazing.
So that's how we're able to wean kids off instant gratification, because in the end, they're making somewhat more difficult things, but because they come out of it doing something that's maybe so intricate but yet simplified, they're more confident in their skills to sit and work longer at doing something even bigger.
It's so cool. You're doing such amazing stuff.
That's one of it. And the other half, a lot of people do, they really do, nowadays we have a lot of people who do copier programs, which is just interesting because I find that people who do that, they get a part of it where, I don't know, we're just a lot of fun. We make it really fun for the kids. And I think that's the hard part to really kind of, to understand, is that we have so much fun with it. Our entire staff, our teachers, we only look for people who are just they really want to take this to the next level and have fun and create and really inspire the kids that we're working with.
Now, do you think you'll ever go on your entrepreneurial hat? Do you think you'll ever make those patterns available or do kind of licensing or franchising or any of those things so that other camps or other things around the country could be doing your system? Or do you think it's something that just you wouldn't do that kind of thing? Do you see that side of it at all?
We definitely talked about it. One of the things that we do definitely want to do is have a licensing program for teachers who teach in shelters. I feel that right now with sex trafficking, a lot of people are talking about it, but it's like everyone's kind of going in doing different things. And we have a really good formula that works with trafficking survivors, even women who are, surviving from domestic violence. And it takes a certain approach. And those are things that we would love to reach out to others and say, hey, come into a class with us so that when you are going into the shelters, you're doing it in a way that's going to be more beneficial to the women and men at times who you're working with. Yeah. That's definitely one of the things at the top of our list. We're also working on one of our patterns that we are going to sell. It's going to be called a creativity kit. When kids come into shelters, we want them to have access to creativity. So we're going to be making a kit, and we're reaching out to quilt guilds to help us make these. They can buy the pattern from us to help us keep our programs going. But when the kids come into shelters, we want them to have something that they can just, start doing. It'll have a lot of different activities in there, small patterns they can follow along, and they can start using it just to kind of have self-help and some self-therapy until we can get in there and start formally teaching classes to them.
That's really cool. I love it. It's really cool. And so how was Houston? You had a booth in the interactive space like we did. How was Houston?
Houston is, I grew up in Canada, so it's always interesting. This weekend, it was like our Munchkin market was about 90 degrees. So, and then today it's chilly. So you have those up and down weather days. I shouldn't complain though, because it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But Houston as a city, it's just been great. It's a huge city. There's so much here.
Yeah.
And I think that we've been blessed to start our organization here because a lot of people have been really supportive and have really been helping us to grow.
Now, did it help to be... I'm just going to interrupt you for one question, so I want to add, because we're running out of time in just a second. But does it help to be in Houston and then have the festival to also be at, so that like the companies get to know you? Like, it seems like that would be a really important connection for your project.
Yeah, Quilt Inc. has been so supportive of us. This is our third quilt festival this year. We'll definitely be back again next year. I think they've just been really happy that we are helping to get kids into sewing because, I mean, you were there. How much, like a handful? There was a handful of children. A handful.
There was.
And if you even that 20 and 30-year-old range, it was missing. So if we don't do something now, this amazing festival that we all love, in the next 15, 20 years, it won't be there because it will not have anyone to sustain it.
And yet the kids that were there, it was kind of interesting because, you know, we were on, I think you were on one side of the place where they could learn to sew, and we were on the other side of it. So they would come and they would spend a lot of time sewing whatever little project they were working on and then and they were really excited. It was interesting to watch. We had Mardi Gras throws, so because we're more, you know, from New Orleans.
That was so cool.
We were like, so if you could prove that you're a kid, are you a kid? They'd be like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, you get a free toy then, right? Like, so because that's, you know, it's just stuff we throw into the street anyway. Like, we're ridiculous. New Orleans is ridiculous. So, but I think my kid came over. We were like, weren't we sharing kids? We were like, hey, if you see a kid, like, tell them to come to us. We're sending kids to you. But it was interesting to see that there's a lot of enthusiasm. I just think there needs to be more. Even at the quilt festival, I really wish that there was more geared towards them, because it's a whole. They should have like a kid row of like kid crap, because it just feels like they just don't have enough to be like, they're so like in the midst of grown up land that it felt like they really needed more for the kids.
We really tried. We reached out to so many different schools because the kids could get free tours of the schools, but the schools, they were the ones that were, you know, they wouldn't provide school buses. And it goes back down to funding. I get it. But still, that's also the thing where the kids, they do want to learn.
They do.
And
they're excited.
They just have a lot of roadblocks. There's a lot of roadblocks for them to get there.
Yeah.
Because by the time the weekend came around, they have the sports and everything like that.
Yeah,
so
that's a lot.
I was hoping the Thursday and Friday to have more school groups in, but even one school who said that they were going to come, they were unable to do so because they ended up getting buses to come. So that was really unfortunate. But you know, we definitely, you know, will keep pushing for it and keep talking about it, keep the conversation going, keep that theme building, and reach out to as many of them as we can.
That's really cool. Well, you're doing amazing things. Amazing things.
Thank you. You're doing awesome stuff.
So I want to come visit you. I think I have to go to Houston for a conference in February, so maybe I can figure out a way that I can come see you guys while I'm there, because it would be really fun to do a field trip and see it and be on your adventure, see it, all of it. It's be so cool.
Come on, Jerry. We can do our mobile.
I totally want to do it. You have no idea. I like dream of that. So I just think I have to see it. It'd be so cool, right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We just got it wrapped, and it just has really silk fabric on the outside. So I'm super excited.
Oh my gosh. You're going to have to totally tell me about that, because my dream is to have a JustWannaQuilt like bus that we can like go on places like what you're doing. Because I think it would be just so cool. To go on adventure and have this thing, and again, this mobile space, because we keep looking for space in New Orleans, and it's hard. Everybody wants us to be different places, and I don't know. I just think, I don't know. I dream of your life, so I think it's really cool. Yeah, it's so great.
Well, it's a lot of fun, and hey, if you guys ever want to partner with us, definitely, you know, we could do something. We can even come drive over to you.
Totally. Let's think about that. Cool. Let's think about ways to partner. I think that would be really great. I think it would be awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's keep thinking about that. That would be really cool. I would love it. Awesome. Well, let's officially end. Hold on while I turn off the recording. But thank you again. Do you need to review this before we post it?
No, wherever you want to post. If you're cutting it, pasting it, it's up to you. So,
we do very little editing. I'm kind of like I'm all about the authentic. No, I'm just like, this is too much work. Yeah. So it's the real thing.
Not a problem.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, hold on. Let me just turn off the recording. So you've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend-Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.